Hello and welcome to episode 5. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how I might go about processing this image to make Rob and his background seem to blend better, or to just get it to blend better. So let's get started on that. So this is where we left off in episode 4. We've got Rob blended, we've taken away the halo around his arm and body, and then we've also added an inner shadow to his hair so that it darkened up and became a little bit more notable on the edges where his hair's curly and sort of wavy with the background coming through. So that's where we've gotten to. Now we're going to go ahead and start processing the image. I think at this point, actually, where I want to start is to be on the top layer, which is where we finished with the inner shadow and making it separate. And I want to actually grab the crop tool and stretch out the background a little bit. And I'm doing this because I want to show more of the background just because it's got depth. So because that image was there to begin with, and we had stretched it out in episode 4 to get Rob properly placed on this one pillar, there's data there that we can now add back in. So just simply by grabbing the crop tool and stretching it out, we're able to add back some information. So maybe about to there, and you can see that around the edges the how much image we actually have to work with should we choose. But I think for now this is probably pretty good, so we can just hit enter to retain that particular crop. So now we're set, and now we can get started. So the first thing we need to do is think about, where do we want to start? Do we want to start by processing Rob because he's his own separate layer and we could do that? Or do we want to start by processing our background? It doesn't really matter. It's just about workflow and what you're comfortable with. So in this case, I'm probably going to want to start with the background and get that to where I want, because I don't feel like there's much that I need to do here. So to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and select the layer with the background in it, which is our bottom layer, in this case layer 0, because it was our original background that we dropped Rob into. And I've already converted it to a smart object, which means it's going to take smart filters, and I'm going to be able to go back and make adjustments as necessary. So that's really key. So for that, now that it's a smart object, we can go ahead and select Camera Raw Filter. This is where I'm going to start. So now we have the whole image again, even though we're not seeing the whole image in our thumbnail or in our image that we're working on. Because all the data is there, we're going to see it all when we're in Camera Raw. So I'm just going to increase the contrast a little bit, maybe reduce highlights just a bit. I had some little blown out highlights right here on this front pillar on the white. Maybe add a little clarity to get it a little bit more grungy. And I'm just going to desaturate it a hair, not too much, just a little bit. And this is just a starting point, because the neat thing is that because it's a smart object, I can come back in here and make the adjustments as I need to as I go along. So for now, I'm just going to go hit OK. And you can see that that's changed a little bit behind him, darkened up a little bit. But we want Rob to feel like he's got similar light coming in to the image, hitting him the same way it's hitting the pillars. So what we're going to do is now grab the layer with Rob on it, and we're going to grab the layer with the inner shadow that we created in episode 4. We want to grab both because we don't want to process Rob without the shadow we created. It would start to look odd, could change it a little bit, and it would no longer have the effect that we wanted. So we're going to grab both layers, and then we're going to go ahead up to layer, filter, and convert for smart filters. So we're going to come up here and choose this, and what's going to happen is these two layers are going to get blended into a single layer now that is a smart object. Now, the neat thing about this is that we're working non-destructively. So even though it looks like we've gotten rid of everything, we in fact have not. So let me show you how you would see those again. If we double click on the smart layer, we will open up yet a new thumbnail tab in our Photoshop. But now we have Rob again with his mask and the inner shadow. So if we needed to make an adjustment here, we could. So it's pretty simple. When you're done, all you do is click the X to close the layer. Now in this particular case, because I didn't make any adjustments, it did not ask me to save. But had I gone out there and made adjustments on that tab, it would come up and say, do you want to save your changes? And if you have made adjustments, then you'd want to answer yes. And then once you've answered yes, then it would show up here on Rob as this single layer. So one thing that we can see about Rob in comparison to, say, the rest of the background is that Rob has very flat light coming straight on at him. And there are a couple of tricks that we could sort of change the light on him, but we're going to do that in a minute. But that's one thing we would want to consider is we need to make it feel a little bit more like side light. Now he has a little bit of side light right here on his arm and a shadow that's created on his bicep, between his bicep and his tricep. So that's helpful. But I would say we probably want to add additional shadow to this side of his body. But first, let's just take a look at Rob and make some adjustments. Now, one thing that we might want to do is enhance his eyes. Even though he's got quite nice eyes, maybe we could change the color. We could go kind of crazy with this, but there are a few things that we can do to make them stand out a little bit more. So the first thing that we're going to do is go ahead and create a blank layer. And we're going to grab our elliptical tool, which will be hidden here under the rectangle tool. So you have the rectangle marquee and then the elliptical marquee. So we're going to go ahead and grab that. And we're going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit on Rob. So to do that, we're going to use Command or Control plus. And then holding down our Shift key to get the little hand, we can drag the image back across so that we can see really close up on his eyes. Now we're going to take our elliptical tool and we're going to make a round selection on the iris. So try to get it pretty close, and then we can move it around a little bit as so. Now what we want to do was, with the selection being made here, we want to go ahead to Edit, Fill, and we're going to fill this time with 50% gray. So we can go ahead and do that and then hit OK. Now, kind of doesn't look right, but that's okay. We're working on it. So with this 50% gray selection made, we're going to go to Filter, and we're going to go to Noise and Add Noise. Now, this is not something we do regularly on an image, but this is going to make his eyes even stand out more. So what we want to do is set our amount of noise to around 200. So we can drag our little slider up to 200. There we go. And then we also want to hit monochromatic, so we don't want it to have color. And now we're going to say OK. So also, with it still, the selection still made, we're going to go up to Blur, Radial Blur, set our amount to about 40. We want it to be set to zoom instead of spin. And then we're going to hit OK again. And now we're going to go and deselect because we don't need the selection made any longer. So we can come up to Select and deselect, or Command or Control D. So now our selection is undone. Now we want to add a mask with a white mask. So we're basically saying with this white mask that we're going ahead and showing the 50% gray that we did here on his eye. But we want to actually fix this, right? Because we wouldn't want this to overlap his eyelid or anything like that. So first we're going to do is grab our paint, our brush, make sure our foreground is black, make sure we have a bit of a hard edge on the brush, and then we're going to reduce the brush size, and then we're going to paint with black so we can remove this from his eyelid. So we can kind of clean up any mistakes we may have made with our selection in the first place. Now, the next thing we want to do is change our blend mode on this to approximately, to hard light, and then make the opacity around 20%. That's still a little bit much, maybe about 18%. So you can see that we've really emphasized this. Now the other is his iris. Now the other thing is I didn't paint out with a black mask his pupil, and we should. So we still have our brush selected and we still have black. We can just come in here and clean up the pupil area a little bit. So you can see the difference between his right and his left eye. Now this is going to be to taste, so if we think that's still a little bit too much, we continue to back it off just a hair. Now the neat thing is now we can come in here and duplicate this layer. So we can come to Layer and just say Duplicate Layer. You'll say OK. Now it's twice as much because it's over this left eye still, but we can use Free Transform and drag this over to this side, to this eye, and drop it in place, move it around if we need to with the little arrow keys to get it lined up, and then just modify the mask as needed. since his eye lid's a little bit different on this side. So now we've got the same effect on both sides pretty easily. So that's pretty cool. Now, another thing we might want to do is, and I don't think it's necessary so much on his eyes because his eyes are nice and clear and white, but I'm just going to show you just in case you'd want to know how to do this. But if you wanted to brighten the whites of his eyes, or if his teeth were showing, you wanted to brighten his teeth, you could also do that through another layer. So in this case, we're just going to pick a curves layer. And we're not going to change the curve. You don't even need the properties for this because that's not how we're going to use this layer. All we want to do is change the blend mode of the layer to screen. Now you'll watch the whole image get super bright, right? Well, we don't necessarily want it to be super bright on the whole everything. We just want to use this to do touching up his eyes. So we're going to change our mask right here on the curves layer to black. And to do that, you can hit Command with the mask selected as it is, hit Command or Control I, and it turns to black. So now we've hidden that adjustment from the image, and he's returned back to his sort of normal color. Now, what we want to do this time is with our brush, go ahead and change our foreground color to white. So in this case, we're hiding the screen, the lighten adjustment we just made, but we're going to paint it back in. So similar to the eyes, we go ahead and we're going to paint with the same kind of brush, a little bit of hardness in it. We're going to start painting in the whites. Now right now this is looking crazy, but at the end it won't. So I'll show you how we're going to do that. We're just going to reduce it with the opacity a little bit. So if you get sloppy on this, you can always switch the foreground back to black and then repaint it out. The other thing we can do is we can actually use this to increase sort of the brightness of his irises as well. So it can be used for multiple things, which is kind of neat. Now, once we finish this and we don't want to make any adjustments, it's a little bit over, so I'll fix that really quick right here. Oops. Let's go to black. There we go. You can also hit X to switch back to black on the brush. So that's probably pretty good. We're going to push it out. So right now it's all glowy and crazy, and that's not necessary. But once you've done the masking in and out, you can reduce this now, right? So you can make it as bright or as soft as you want it to be. So always find in the 20s to 30%. It depends on the image itself. His eyes were really bright to begin with, but you can see that there's just a little bit of change that's brightened up his eyes a little bit. So that's a pretty cool technique to enhance eyes. All right, so now that we have finished playing with his eyes and making some changes there, we're going to go ahead and just make some changes to his overall image. So we're going to go ahead, select the layer with Rob. We're going to choose Filter and Camera Raw. And this will take us into Camera Raw. So now we're just looking at the layer with just Rob on it. We're going to bring down the exposure just a little bit, not too much, just maybe half a stop. We're going to go ahead and add a little bit of contrast. Maybe open up the shadows just a little bit to brighten his shirt and his hair. Just add a little bit of clarity. Not too much because we're going to do some dodging and burning on Rob as well. So we're going to go ahead and hit OK and see how that looks. All right. Now, Rob's face looks a little bit red, so why don't we go ahead and grab an adjustment layer. We're going to go with color balance and add just a little bit of blue into his skin. Now, we don't want to make everything about him look blue, or everything about the image look blue, which we just did. So first of all, we want to make sure that we clip this color balance layer to Rob, and we do that by holding the Alt or Option key, and we are going to get this little down arrow. We then left click there, it'll attach it. So this little down arrow means that this color balance layer is only affecting this layer as opposed to both of these layers. So that's our first step. But we also don't necessarily need to make all of him a little bit blue. What we want to do is convert this mask to black with by using Command or Control I, and then painting with white again. So we set our foreground color to white, and we're going to go ahead and use our brush, but this time we don't want the brush to have any hardness, so I'm just going to go ahead and make that a soft brush. Increase the brush size by using the right bracket key, and then just painting white back in over Rob's face. So you can see how the mask on the layer has now a white hole in it, and that's basically allowing the adjustment we just made to only be applied to that one part of Rob. So you can see that right here on the right. Now, let's say we want to go ahead and create a little bit of a shadow to emphasize the fact that the light is coming in from our right. We can do that by using a layer style. So we're going to go ahead and double click. So what I did here is on the layer that says layer 1 inner shadow, but it's Rob's layer, I'm going to go ahead and double click in this sort of gray area right here. When I do that, I'm going to come up with the layer style panel. The way we want to control the direction of light here is to choose gradient overlay. Now, right away, that looks pretty scary, but we're going to come in here and make a change. So even though I checked the box, and if you look at that, it looks like this to begin with. I've checked the box. I'm not actually getting the gradient characteristics here, so I actually have to land on the line that says gradient overlay and highlight it, and now I have this option of the gradient overlay here. So one of the things that we want to do is change the direction of our light, and you can see as I move this angle around, look at this box over here on the right hand side. As I change the angle, you see how the light shows where it's coming from. Well, you want to set the light to be where you believe it's to be the direction. So in this case, I want the light coming from right to left. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and change my overlay mode to multiply. I can change the opacity to make this as strong or as light as I want. And I'm also changing the scale a little bit. Now the neat thing about using this is that I can actually come now onto the image and move where this gradient falls across Rob to anywhere that I sort of want it to be. So I've moved it around a little bit more, and so now we've just casted just a bit of shadow on his left side, which is more in line with the way the light is moving across him. Okay, so the next step is going to be to do some dodge and burning to just emphasize Rob's features and his muscle and his arm muscles and stuff like that. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and create a new blank layer. So from the bottom, we're going to select the new layer option. We get a blank layer. We're going to go ahead and choose Edit, Fill, and 50% gray. Now there's a couple different ways to do dodging and burning, but when you're doing it on skin, this 50% gray tends to work really, really well. So we're going to go ahead. Now we obviously can't see Rob any longer, so we need to change our blend mode to soft light. Now we can see through, and we can start the dodging and burning. Dodging is adding light, burning is adding dark. And we're going to use the dodge and burn tools in Photoshop to do that. So we're going to go ahead. You can see that I've already selected my dodge tool, but right below it is the burn tool. I like to just start on dodge and do the light first, and then just switch back and forth. We could come and switch tools, or all you have to do is hold down the Alt or Option key to switch between them. So even though you don't see a change in the icon itself, you're going to be burning if you're holding down the Alt or Option key. So the next thing we want to do is make sure that we have a nice soft dodge tool, so we can check on that. Our hardness is 0, so that's perfect. And then we want to make sure that we're in the range and it's on midtones, and that our exposure is 10, maybe 15%, someplace in there, not too much, because we want this to be an additive adjustment, and that we have protect tones on. So what we're going to do is emphasize the lighter areas. So you can see here that his biceps lighter and his triceps lighter. So we're going to go ahead and sort of increase the brightness on these two muscle groups. And it doesn't look like there's a lot going on, but that's because we're doing it in an additive way. So we're adding it by just going over it more than once. We're making it brighter. So we're going to just start with that and see what we have. The next thing we want to do is to emphasize that we've brightened these two areas. We want to actually add a little bit of more shadow to this muscle transition here. So we're going to hold down Alt or Option and go ahead and just work a little bit of the shadows here in his armpit and then up on his arm. Now as we do that, you can sort of see that it's starting to take shape, but if you click it on and off, you really can tell where you've created a shadow mark. So it looks like his muscle's actually larger. Now, the neat thing is we can use this layer for more than his arm, so we can come over to his face and maybe take this back down to 10% just so it's not as aggressive. And we can emphasize his beard. By holding down the Alt or Option key again, we can darken up the edges of his beard a little bit, kind of make it a little bit more notable, and his mustache. All right, we can also hold down the Alt or Option key and just emphasize his cheekbone line and change the size of our brush a little bit, and we can also emphasize just sort of the lines around his nose. Now, the idea here is that you follow where there's already shadow when you're doing burning. And now that we've kind of burned in some areas, we're going to emphasize with some dodging. So again, the bridge of his nose and everything, we would actually add a little bit more lightness to that, and also highlight his cheekbones a little bit. So if we play with the eyeball again and turn on and off the layer, you can really see how it's emphasized sort of these areas of his face. So we can add a little more if we need to, just by holding down the Alt and Option key and switching between them. All right, so for now that's good enough. Now if we felt like one of these lines happen to be a little bit too aggressive, so if we want to see what our 50% gray layer looks like, we can turn everything off, and you can see here where you've got the shadow of all the lines that we've drawn. But maybe this is a little bit too aggressive here. If that's the case, we can take our Lasso tool. So up here, it's our Lasso polygonal and magnetic tool. We can choose the Lasso tool, and we can just actually draw a rough selection around this, and then go up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and just blur it by a couple of pixels. It just doesn't need very much, just a little bit. Hit OK. Now over here on this side, you can see we didn't affect how those lines looked at all, but here we've softened this edge up a little bit. So we can choose Deselect, which is Control or Command D, and it'll make the changing of the light and dark just a little bit smoother here. So let's back him back out and take a look and see if there's anything else that we want to do. And I think for now, probably not. I think we have a better sense of where he is in position to the rest of this light coming through. And by creating the shadow over here, we've brightened up his eyes a little bit. And we've emphasized just his features some. So I think he stands out pretty well against his background. So all in all, depending on the image that you're using, you can go, further, do more. Each image is going to require something different, but for now I think this is a pretty good start, and seeing how these layers and mask work together, and also using smart layers to make adjustments that can be changeable in the future, which is really a great reason to work in a non-destructive mode, which is what we did here today. So I hope that helps. See you in episode 6.